Good evening, everybody. My name is Brent Lindeque. They call me the Good Things Guy, and I have the absolute honor of being your moderator today as we speak about arts, culture, and the classroom with what we have as our expert panelists sitting next to me over here. Right on my left-hand side and your right, we have 702 and CapeTalk's Nothemba Madumo. Please give a big round of applause. She is one of South Africa's most revered broadcasters whose voice has become synonymous with jazz and storytelling. She has graced both television and radio, and as of 2024 currently hosts Jazz and Beyond on 702 and CapeTalk, where I work, but she's there every Sunday evening. Another round of applause. Next up, a face you should know, music legend Sipho HotStix Mabuse. Yeah, big round of applause.
I applaud myself.
You can applause for yourself.
I don't think it's
One of South Africa's most celebrated musical legends with a career spanning decades. He's more than a performer. He's been recognized for his contributions to music and social change, including the Sama Lifetime Achievement Award and the Order of Kihamanga. Ikamanga.
Yes.
Big round of applause. And last, but certainly not least, we have the Redhill School Executive Head, Joseph Gerassi. Did I say that correctly?
Perfect.
I did. An educator renowned for his progressive leadership and commitment to holistic learning. Currently serving as the executive head of Redhill School in Johannesburg, he has championed initiatives that blend academic excellence with social consciousness. Joseph is the visionary behind the Red Fest, which is happening pretty soon, right? An annual arts festival that empowers students to explore critical societal themes through creative expression. Big round of applause. So, I'm not going to lie, I'm not an expert when it comes to art, culture, or classrooms. I have been in classrooms. I did matriculate eventually. And I'd like to say that I have culture, but I am from the south of Johannesburg. So that's a whole other conversation to be had. And there is some art in my house, but art is also subjective, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. But I know, without my upbringing, without drama, without Eisteddfods, without creative writing, I would not have the career that I have today. For those that might not know me, I own what has become South Africa's top good news site. And collectively, through social media, websites, and the billboards and all the rest, we reach over 30 million South Africans on a monthly basis, sharing over 100 good news stories with South Africa and the world. So the lead up to tonight's podcast, I was thinking, how does that fit in? You're the Good Things Guy, you write about good news. What does that actually mean? So I went onto the site where a lot of the stories are not written by me anymore, they're written by my journalists. And I did a search on arts and culture and sort of what the headlines were. And here's 5 that resonate with what we are today and where we're speaking about. A South African won a global photography prize with an incredibly heartbreaking tribute that happened over in London. We had a township spa day to spread love and nail polish, and that's creativity in some sort of way. Tyler, who we know, released her new single Bliss, which is incredible. Merle's view on the world is a deliciously funny read, which was a book that came out recently. And then a dancing sensation, Chloe Windle, is going to represent South Africa at the World Cup finals in Spain. Arts and culture is a backbone of good news. It's something that we should celebrate, and a lot of our South Africans and our pupils sometimes don't have access to arts and culture to sometimes get the skills that they need to move forward. So, Joseph, I'm going to start with you. Why is it important that we create space for arts and culture expression in the lives of young people, especially in today's South Africa?
So, Brent, I think a lot of people will automatically just think about the artistic side. But there's no doubt about it that from a cognitive and academic perspective, students who do arts, whether they're doing visual arts, dramatic arts, music, are definitely shown to be more advanced in terms of their academics, specifically in subjects such as literacy and numeracy. And we see that all along the way. So they've done testing, for instance, where you look at the brain and you speak to kids about different types of subjects, and you talk about history, bits of the brain will light up. When you actually move on to the artistic subjects like visual arts and music, the entire brain starts to move. So the evidence shows us that if kids are embarking upon art subjects, taking visual arts, dramatic arts, etc., there is no doubt from the research that you're giving them an advantage in their academic subjects. And I think that really is important. But there's another aspect to all of that, and that is about the social and emotional well-being of children who do the arts, because it allows them to start to engage with the human experience. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, and why we do Red Fest and why we have productions that really do discuss society, and we know about that, is that often we're living in a world now, we just have to look at the world. And it's a world whereby people don't see each other and can't actually understand what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, and to experience that human experience that we all share. The arts allows us to do that. I always say that, you can teach science and you can teach mathematics. You can try and teach an argument. You can try and tell somebody why they shouldn't be a racist or a homophobe or that type of thing. But depending on the background they come from, trying to make a logical argument doesn't work. When do we actually change the way we think about humanity and about different people is when it touches our heart. And the only way that we can get people to feel things is through the arts. When you go and see a production, when you go and see a movie, when you're painting, when you see somebody who's put their life into a piece of artwork, you have to use your emotions to be able to get that work to mean something. Artwork is not created, music is not created just by thinking about it, academically. It has to come from a deep sense of emotion, of feeling. And we find that really changes people and the way they think about other people. So it's not only from an academic and a cognitive perspective that we advance ourselves, but it's definitely one from understanding the human experience and getting children to understand each other better, different cultures, all of those really good things. And it's about how do we actually make that not a privilege to have an arts education, but an expectation. How do we get to a stage where all schools are expected to give those type of things to children and not say, oh, well, that's school, it's a privilege to be able to have that.
I'm glad you brought up that idea of that not all schools have access to the arts and to creativity. And when I was growing up, obviously it was a lot less then. It was 30, 35 years ago. In the schools, that wasn't a mainstream thing that was offered to children. In most schools, it wasn't offered at all. So in your educational experience, let's take it to the last decade. Has that changed in schools in South Africa?
Yeah, it definitely has changed. So as you said, growing up, we had no access to music classes, drama classes, dance classes. It didn't exist. The best that you could do was take part in a house play or in the major musical that the school had. But you never ever learned or studied theatre. A lot of schools would have had visual arts, but definitely not drama and music. We definitely have seen that change taking place, but it's the extent to which it is taking place and the support that it has within schools. A lot of our under-resourced schools, it's the first thing that's going to be cut, right? When you're going to cut a program, you're going to cut the arts program. I'll give you just an example of the hierarchy of subjects. And even in something like we have at our school, which is the International Baccalaureate, which is an international program, they like the kids to be able to do subjects from the three main areas of study. So it's humanities, the arts, and the sciences. They'd like you to take one of each. But should you wish to take 2 science subjects, you can drop your art subject. Should you wish to take 2 humanities, you can drop the art subject. You cannot drop a science, you cannot drop a humanities. So the one that you can drop out of is the art subject to take 2 of the others. Crazy for me. I understand maybe you want to take a science, but why not say to children, you can have 2 sciences and an art subject? No, it's not happening. So even in the international thinking around education, arts always comes off second best, and because of that, it gets a reputation that it's not important.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that we're having. And if you look at South Africa, for instance, you need to ask the why we have arts education. And that's got to be something that our government has to answer. Why is arts education important? I'm not convinced that government would be able to give you a good enough explanation, because if they could give you a good enough explanation, they'd be pouring money into arts education, and maybe something we can discuss a little bit later, our corporates, why they do not put money into arts education. For Redfest, for example, right? I've been trying for 5, 6, 7 years to really get a corporate to sponsor this. And at Redfest, we have a day just on arts education for children. June 16th, we have student productions being performed amongst all the professional productions. I can't get a sponsor for it. But if I change Redfest to Rugby Fest, they will pour millions into that. And you keep having to ask the question, what is it about our society that sees sport as being important? Why our sportsmen get paid the amount of money they get, but our artists struggle to make a living? Our society is telling us that it's not important, and so what students do is they pick up on that, and when they have to drop a subject, they'll drop the art subject.
So I went to a technical school, and so at that school, sport was all it. If you were a sportsman, you were at the top of your game. Teachers treated you differently. The arts didn't even feature. Like, that wasn't even part of it. Sipho, if I could throw it to you, you've been in the industry for a couple of years. Just a few. What role did the arts play when you were at school?
Good evening, everyone. Should I answer that question first, or should I say something that's really been close to what I've been listening to?
I think if you want to follow on from Joseph, then let's do that.
I just felt that he was saying everything that many of us have always been asking as artists. Frankly, this subject should not really be part of what we always discuss every day. But you can actually see from the government level, as you already mentioned, the kind of ministers that are thrown into the arts and culture. So you know what I'm saying, and you know what we're dealing with, you know. And where the government feels that perhaps there's something that we should draw money from, it would always be at the arts and culture, you know. And most of the money that goes to the other departments will be taken away from the arts and culture. So that's the situation that we're always faced with in this country. I frankly don't believe that we should always be having to be complaining about arts and culture is not being taken seriously and so on. But unfortunately, that is the situation that we find ourselves in. When we started, okay, let me speak about myself. And one of the things that I also wanted to correct is we are not experts. Maybe I should speak for myself.
Please tell him.
I am not an expert. I can only speak.
I'm an arts appreciator.
So I appreciate that you said that, but I also need to applaud you and celebrate you that you've been in the industry for so long that there is expertise that comes from that. And so in a very big way, you are very skilled in your thoughts, and that's why everybody is here today, because they want to hear what you have to say. So you might not be an expert on paper, neither am I, you know, but we're here to have that conversation.
You know, one of the most fascinating things I've always wondered about is when you engage people, you find that there is so much sentiment, you know, coming and appreciation of the arts. However, when you talk to those who are supposedly have the interest to invest in the arts, it's always a challenge to convince people that any society would do better with, you know, cultural activism and so on. I always give an example, for instance, that many of us want to go to America, not because of DT, but we want to go to America or the UK because of the Beatles. We want to go to America because of Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, these are the people that draw a lot of people to, that is part of their culture. Now, in one of my experiences interacting with a scientist, he said to me, Sipho, there is something that you don't even know about yourselves as artists. I said, please tell me. He said, you don't even realize the level of intellect that the artists have. We always have to make reference to everything that we write as scientists. We have to read books. You create music out of nothing, and we respond to that. So your level of intellect is quite higher. So don't underestimate your capacity or your capabilities to be able to make, to influence society. And we have not really taken that seriously as how important arts and culture is. And again, when I'm privileged somewhat to interact with many politicians, and one of them being former President Kgalema Motlanthe, who's a very serious arts practitioner. He loves jazz, intensely. And he always calls me and he says, what we don't understand as politicians is that every part of our society is developed around the arts. And if we ignore that, there would be little development of how our children grow. Yes, indeed, as Joseph said, the government will never put money into arts and culture, but they will put money into sports. Yeah. There's a lot of money that, we always have to be saying, hey, Mr. McKenzie,
I've actually seen people on social media that are tagging him and being like, this event is happening, or we need money for this. People are trying to have those conversations. I haven't dug deep enough to see if he replies, so I'm not sure. But Nothemba, do you have something to add to what we're saying?
Maybe just on top of what the former president was saying, how essential the arts are into who we are as human beings, and also just our identity, and also just how we interact with the arts the moment we wake up until we go to bed. And it is such a normal thing that people don't even see it, that the bed you are sleeping in, somebody designed that. The pajamas you're wearing, somebody designed that.
The phone you're using to scroll on.
You're using, the music you listen to, somebody created that. The painting that you love, the pictures that you take. There's a photographer who artistically did that. The building you are in, somebody designed that. The TV shows you watch, there is soundtracks in that.
There's soundtracks,
there's script writers, there's every aspect of your life on every waking moment of the day. Some artists put a lot of work in there, from the moment you wake up until you go to bed.
Yeah.
But and also the fact that even the type of art you appreciate has a lot to do with who you are, how you identify yourself, how you feel confident in associating with a set of values that belong to this culture. How you become confident because you have expressed yourself artistically. You don't care whether they like what you did, but you're just so proud of yourself that you created this work of art. Be it, a play that may never be performed. Be it a book you've written that may only sell 10 copies.
Yeah.
But the fact that you poured out yourself in there, you know, does so much for you as a person and your spirit and just your sense of worth as a person.
So I want to take it back to education.
Yeah.
Did you have access to arts and creativity and those sorts of things at a schooling level? What gave you your confidence in your own thoughts around arts and culture?
I'm lucky. I was born here, but I grew up in Swaziland. And the schooling that I had, and because of my parents, who were not only academics, but also artistic. My father was English, history, law, whatever. My mother was mathematics, science, and music. And
Why do you put it the other way? Why didn't you start? She could have started with music, but you know, finally she decides no, music and music.
so I was exposed to that when I was growing up. We had a piano at home because my mother played the piano. And it was at a time during the apartheid struggle. So a lot of politicians who then escaped to Swaziland would bypass our home. And lucky enough, Abdullah Ibrahim was one of those people who stayed in Swaziland.
Privilege.
So because, yes, I was. So because he was friends with my dad, he'd come and play the piano at home, and my dad decided, can you just teach this little one something, you know? So he tried to teach me. He was a horrible teacher. But I got exposed to that. I'm one of those who used to play the recorder and, grew up with that because my parents wanted that instead. Yeah. And that in itself made one outside of the academics, because it's something that also speaks to an emotional part of you. It speaks to compassionate part of you. It also opens your mind. It makes you want to explore and be creative and think of things. And there's a joke my dad used to make. We used to live in Mafikeng for a while. And Mafikeng, if anyone has been there, is quite flat. And then when he'd get annoyed about when people are just slow or delayed or they don't want to think, he's like, do you know this landscape is so detrimental to people's minds? I'm like, what do you mean? Because people, if there was a hill or a mountain, at least people could imagine what's on the other side of that. So they'd expand their minds and their thinking kind of thing. And the arts does that. It makes you imagine things. So I like the
Brent, you asked me the same question. I think I needed to. Sorry, I just went on it.
No, because you said something so thought-provoking. About, I was like, it's enough.
Yes, about schooling and in arts. You know, I must say that we started this band in a high school. It was at a high school in Orlando West. We were privileged to have had a headmaster who was a choral music composer. Now, I grew up in an environment in Orlando West. It's called the cradle of political advancement or so. But most of the people in Orlando West were very musical, even though they were political. For instance, we had Zef Mutuping from the PAC. Our headmaster, Dr. S.K. Matsike, was a choral music composer. So when we started the band at high school, he was elated. And he would always say to us, whatever you do, come to school and make your music in the school. So that way we were encouraged because we found someone who had compassion.
Yeah.
Someone who was, related to what we were doing as students. And of course, we became the favorite of all the high schools in Soweto. And not far away from me, there was a Sibongile Khumalo, there was Kaya Mahlangu, there was Mr. Masote, and most of the children out there were taught to play violins. I was fascinated by the fact that the SABC orchestra used to spend most of the Thursdays in a hall called the Uncle Tom's Hall. And I don't even imagine that going there was because I knew what was going on. It was a curiosity that was created in my childhood. And eventually I found myself playing the flute because I was fascinated with what I see. Watch me today play the flute.
I think it goes back to what Nothemba said about the mountain. You saw the mountain and you wanted to see beyond the mountain, and that's where your imagination thrived.
Precisely.
I kind of feel like every single human being is born creative.
Absolutely.
We are all born with some level of creativity. We have that imagination. We color and we make up stories. And I used to sit in sand pits by myself and play for hours, being creative. And something at the schooling level, whether it's because it's there or it's not there or you have access to it, something changes the course of some human brains where they give up on their imagination. Is that a schooling problem? Is it an education problem?
So they always say schooling stops creativity to a large extent. Right.
Well, sorry, I'm going to add in here. Wasn't the schooling model, as we kind of see it now, based in something that was like on the Ford model, where it's the line and you learn to do this, and it's like building a car. And so they take that creativity out of it.
So schools were never created to be creative spaces. They were never created to give people a voice. Right. They were set up during the Industrial Revolution. Because what was happening is people were coming to the city centres and they were having to come to work there and they didn't know what to do with the children. So what they did is they set up this whole institution called schooling where while the parents were at work, they would then teach children who were going to go into the workplace how to obey the rules and the regulations. Thus we have bells in schools because the bell would tell you when it was lunchtime. And thus you would be on that, on the operational line, and everybody was taught to do a certain thing in a certain way. And the last thing you would want is that you would want students to question authority, because then you'd be questioning what the bosses were trying to do. So schools were set up to perpetuate what the bosses of industry wanted. And what tended to happen is, I always say children you are born creative and you are born as an investigator. Take a child at early childhood and put them in a garden and they're picking up rocks and they're picking up worms and they're getting dirty. They are natural investigators. And as they get into like junior school, so they have to sit behind desks and line up outside classrooms, and you get told to put up your hand when you want to ask a question. And so we start to take the creativity out. I gave I was at a group of teachers once, and I walked into the classroom and I said to them, look, I want you to do me a favor. You've got beautiful trees all around, painted trees around the classroom. What do you think about them? What thinking is coming out of these trees? And I said, no, the kids painted them. I said, let's stop there. I said, notice, every one of these trees, right, have the same colored bark. And every one of these trees have the same colored leaves. And what's even more impressive is that the sun in every picture is on the right-hand side. Right? In other words, what you're telling me is that's the teacher's thinking. Because the teacher told the children what a tree looks like, and don't paint outside of those colors. So one of the things when I went to Redhill, I said, I'll come as the head if you allow me to change education. If you allow me to allow children to color outside of the lines. I don't ever want to see a tree look like another tree, because no child imagines a tree the same as another child. I want to see pink and purple leaves. I want to see colors that only can be in a child's imagination. I want you to get rid of the fear of learning. I don't want exams. I don't want assessments. I don't want prize givings. I don't want competition. Because once you put the fear of learning, you start to get children to have to think in a particular way to make the teacher happy so that they can get the result that they need to get to take home and show mom and dad I got an A.
Can I come to your school?
Our children run around without shoes. We've taken them back to being able to feel what the earth feels like when they run around. And it's about getting back to that creative state, because it's only when you allow the freedom to be creative will you become the thinkers of the world. Also, you'll become the people that will question government, will question policies. And we're always very proud of Redhill students because they question everything we ask them. Right?
So there's this is hashtag not sponsored, but I'm friends with David Higgs, and David Higgs has got Saint, which is in Sandton, the restaurant. And the one night I was sitting there with a bunch of friends, and we were looking at, I don't know if you've ever been there. The bar is insane. With the creativity of whatever they created, the statue that's fallen over and it changes colors and shapes. And my friends and I were going, how the hell did the person who came up with this get David and them to sign this off? Because if you had to try explain that to me, I wouldn't have signed that off. How did you get a school to buy into this idea to let kids not wear shoes and color outside of the lines and be creative? Was that difficult?
No, I told them I wouldn't come if they didn't let me do that. I think I came to Redhill at a particular time where they were looking for change. They were looking for someone to come in and do something different. And I'd said, I've managed schools my whole life. I can manage schools. It's not difficult to do that. But to change education is difficult. Because one of the things you've got to do is, the first thing you've got to change the teacher's mindset, right? Because teachers had 15 years of learning how to become a teacher, because they were at school for 15 years. So they model their practice on what they saw their teachers teaching them and how they did that. When I think back to, I was a history teacher, the amount of times I walked up and down reading a textbook and making children write out what I was reading, it seems absurd that you would ever make children do that. But nobody questioned that, because that's what you were taught to do. So you walk up and down, you read the textbook, and children are sitting there making notes. Throw that all out, guys. Now we talk about having to ask questions. You give the kids the notes if you want to. Give them stuff they need to know, but it's more important the questions that they ask. That's more important than the answers that I can give them. And it's really about changing that model and getting our children to be able to think in that particular way. But you've got to give children the freedom to think. You've got to allow them to be able to, all of our children learn music. It's compulsory. We see it as a second language. And you see the correlation between music and mathematics. Our top mathematics students, most of them will be doing music, right? Because it teaches you spatial awareness. Mathematics and music is all about spatial awareness, understanding how notes fit together, how things fit together. But if you don't allow a child to investigate and dream and question, they never will. They will do what we teach them to do, and they will become compliant members of society. I remember, my early ideas of where South Africa was. And yes, I grew up as a white person in apartheid. I will never forget going to watch Sarafina. I was the only white kid in the audience, right?
It's coming back, Mike.
It's coming back. I see, I was there the other night. It's coming back. I was the only white kid in the audience. And I came there because I happened to know people that were in show business that were not white, who took me to go and see it. So my early memories, and that transformed my thinking. Now, had I not seen that, and had I not been, it's not even inspired, it's not inspirement, it's the feelings of watching that make you question how you live your life and what you would see as being normal in the northern suburbs, right? You start to question that, but it had to touch my heart. And I want every child to be touched, right, by what they do and what they see. And last thing on that, when you ask about, when I was at school, I was a very shy kid. I didn't want to participate, I didn't want to get involved, and I was forced to be in a house play. They needed somebody with a stick to be a guard.
You were the tree.
And I was that kind of person. And then I kind of thought, but this is quite nice. And I was just really lucky that the king, fell out a week before. I said, I'll be the king. But I realized that when I was on stage, that was my place. That was the confidence. That's where I found my people. And in the last production that I did at Redhill, we did Little Shop of Horrors. When we got together at the end of it, each of the kids stood up to tell their story. I was amazed to see how emotional they became, because what they felt, they were losing their family. That sense of being part of something that was cultural and it brings people together. They had these shared experiences and emotions, and so that hasn't changed. What it gives a child, the confidence that theatre, music gives a child. Sometimes nothing else can give the child that kind of confidence.
Absolutely.
Do you know what he's reminding me of? I was a teacher at a point. I actually studied Bachelor of Education, and my majors were Geography and English. Mm-hmm. And started teaching in Mafikeng at a place called Itsoseng. And that school had 80 kids in a class. Now,
sorry, you just said 80?
Yes.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So now English is a language you need to practice on a daily. That in itself was a challenge. And then geography as well. But now I then found out that in my geography class, because the kids are confused at what the hell is this woman talking about, rivers, mountains, what. Then I thought, and because of that, they'd be noisy and not pay attention. And then I decided, let me teach the story of the earth and our environment in a story-like manner. That's when I got their attention. Mm-hmm. Because then they could relate, because this is a story that they live with the sand and the types of sand and how we get the rain and the rivers, and then only then they paid attention and they stopped the noise and they'd look forward to my class because of this storyteller, you know? So, and that requires an art. And it means that they love to listen to stories. And the storyteller's culture is going away in this country anyway. You know?
Sorry. Okay.
Jump in.
Please.
Jump in.
I must be honest, you know, the fact that, let me speak for how we as black people relate to our children in the arts. We are always disparaging. You know, I used to date someone whose parents were highly educated. The mother was a principal and the father was a doctor. And they would always be saying, what are you going to do with him? He's going to keep you hungry. He's not going to be able to maintain. The fact that the arts, the music, was considered an aberration. You know, it was nothing that could be creative and create a family life. And to some extent, I'm just as guilty because my children want to be musicians. And I keep saying to them, go to school. You know, I insist that they go to university, and every time they say, but Papa, you're a musician and look at where you are. And I always say to them, what makes you think you're going to be like me? You know, and this subject is very critical, and I'm so grateful for you, you know, Joseph, that you've just, you know, some of the points that you've made about how we relate to the arts is such that when I go back home and say, when are you going to have your first show, my son?
That's
Thank you, really, you know.
So I listened to a podcast the other day about a young man whose family was all about education and becoming a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. And that's exactly what he grew up with, like, and his siblings went on to become doctors and whatever they were, and he just didn't want to. And he always felt lesser than in the eyes of his parents. So he went through his life trying to get validation from his parents by over-excelling in everything that he did. He landed up creating one of the biggest sports magazines in America, and it still wasn't good enough for his folks. It still wasn't good enough. And it led him to a point where he was working so hard that he actually burnt out. He absolutely burnt out. And then he got into podcasting, so shout out Podcast Party, because it changed his life. Not from here, but in America. And at one point, he came up with this whole idea to travel around the whole America and to podcast at every single baseball game. And his mom joined him at some random point. And he felt so nervous that she was there, and it was crazy. And they were passing Mount Rushmore. The podcast is fantastic. You need to listen to it. And she phoned her husband from Mount Rushmore. And she said, we came to America many, many years ago, and we always planned to come to Mount Rushmore. And we needed to. But more so, we needed to see our son happy. And that's what he is today. Because he was doing something that he absolutely loved, being creative. So before I throw questions out to the audience, I want to ask each of you, you've told us about education. We've spoken about it at the formative years. What does that do, even if you don't have the skills and you don't have that in your schooling system, if you get to be creative as an adult? I've just kind of said it makes you happy. But really, what does that do for society?
It makes us believe in ourselves, in our humanity, because it speaks to our soul, our spirit. It's the one thing that makes us human. Everything else is technical. It's, we trying to get pay bills and whatever. What it is that makes me connect to you, there is an art. There is an art form that makes me connect to you, especially culturally. And I think Joseph, referred to it earlier on in terms of it gives us a sense of community, our culture, the things that we believe in, the things that make us happy to be alive is the fact that I can wear my beads, my turban, I can identify with my parents, my grandparents, my ancestors, who they were. I can empathize with how they lived and why they lived the way they lived. The fact that we're on the African continent, the fact that we are dark-skinned has to do with the climate and how we adjust to the climate to be able to live in it. Why our hair is curly like this is because of the climate. So if I'm going to straighten it, there's an imbalance in who I'm becoming. Not that I haven't straightened it, I have. in who I am, even my health-wise, because now I'm altering nature, kind of thing. And the fact that when I see people believe in the same things that I believe in, who even choirs, how choirs, you grew up, those were the most common art forms in schools, in the black schools, choirs and things like that. Because that was, and dance groups and, and theater productions and things, all those kids no one would interfere with that program. They would look forward to those afternoons more than the academic stuff.
They would skip the academic, come to school at 1, and then go to theatre.
Kind of thing. But also just making you understand that, yes, this is your heritage, this is your culture, this is how you grew up. You want to understand how others who are different from you, what's their story, And then it creates that human connection, and also just being able to get along together without judgment, but with just appreciating other people and, hey, let's do this together, kind of thing. I think it makes for a better society, just for us to understand each other and not hate each other because we're different.
I love
and
it.
It's when you have issues with your own identity, do you then become insecure about how others are.
That's powerful.
Thank you. I didn't think so, but thank you. Thank you.
Well, I won't be as elaborate as you are, Nothemba. You've said almost everything. You've taken my words and you made them yours.
Sorry.
No, but I'd really love to say that in my own experiences as a musician, I've always maintained that nothing brings joy to people than the arts. The arts will always be central to how people respond or relate to whatever situation there is. You know, in my upbringing, in my growing up, I'd go to a funeral. People would start singing, and it changes the mood completely from sadness to joy. You know, you go to a soccer game, someone scores a goal, and there are 40,000, 80,000 people in a football game, and they start creating all these songs, and it brings joy all the time to people. You go into an art gallery, the smiles that you see in people's faces as they look at the arts, and then you suddenly realize that this is more joyful than anything else that you've experienced as a person. So for me, the arts and culture are the best place to find joy and happiness.
So sitting up here, I mean, that deserves a round of applause as well.
Yes.
But sitting up here and looking at you, while Sipho was talking, you were smiling. When he was telling stories, you were smiling. It brings joy. Joseph, for you?
I'd love to do a research project on how many of our government ministers actually involved themselves or had the opportunity to ever be in the arts. Because I think in every single part of society, anybody who is successful, there's a creativity about them. They have the ability to problem solve. They have the ability to think outside of the box. You take any artist, any director, any choreographer, you're having to think outside of the box. You can't keep doing things the same way. You have to push boundaries all the time. Now, I kind of want to think, imagine all of our ministers could think outside of the box. If all our ministers were problem solvers, were people that could use their critical thinking skills to say, how do we solve the problem? Imagine they could see South Africa as a production and a piece of work that was having to be put together to create an incredible theatrical production or incredible piece of art or an incredible choir of people coming together to harmonize. If we went in with that kind of thinking and they went in with that kind of thinking, we might start actually fixing the problems instead of, destroying and fighting with one another. So from everything we've heard here, if everybody was involved in arts education, we'd all be happier people, right? Because we would go out and we don't have to be artists ourselves, but we would take the time to go and enjoy choirs and music and operas, and we'd be happier people. We'd be people who have a humanity and would understand the human experience because we would have had conversations about difference and how we are all different and how we can come together. And then we'd also be able to problem solve and think critically and creatively and solve the very problems that we have in this country. So, I would say let's look at South Africa as a artistic work that's having to be put together, and let's just make it into a beautiful piece of art. But we need the kind of people that buy into that and that have that creative thinking and have that passion to actually build things and not break them down.
Oh.
One of the things that
Just give him a round of applause.
One of the most interesting things about our politicians, what made Zuma most popular? Chinois, Chinois. When he started singing, everybody forgot that they were politicians.
Yeah.
They were responding to his singing more than his political thinking. So that should give an indication as to the strength and the power of the arts and music, how it draws attention to oneself. And you spoke about, problem solving. Former President Thabo Mbeki was a flute player. He studied classical music, and
we all know that when he was in power, our economy was growing and growing and growing.
Yeah.
So you must say something about that flute player that knew how to grow an economy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
My last word is on a very important, I think, matter that the arts can contribute immensely to, is the state of people's mental health.
Yes.
That you'll be surprised how I've got some musician friends who do therapy by teaching those with mental stress and whatever, by just letting them learn an instrument, to play an instrument, and how therapeutic that is. So if people would consider that when they're going through whatever mental stress, try and see if you can paint. You don't have to be good at anything. Just express yourself artistically in a painting, or write, or just learn to play an instrument, or even listen to music for that matter. But just utilize and incorporate the arts into your life. It does soften things a little bit better.
We recently published a story about a South African who was in an accident and had lost all of his sort of cognitive abilities and wasn't able to talk anymore. And he started music therapy, and the only way that he's communicating now is through song.
Sure.
So it is real. That is a reality there. I want to put it out to the audience if we have any questions. There is a mic that will be roaming around.
No, they're fine. They don't need
Do we need a mic? I think for recording purposes we do.
Hi, thank you. It was a lovely discussion, and just to say how much joy your music brought to me as a child, so thank you for that. I'm Kirti, I'm a neurologist. I focus on brain health, and I use art and culture in a lot of my work because it does support brain health and mental wellness in different ways. So there's two specific aspects that I wanted to bring up as a question and a comment. The first is, and it's an and question, not a or question. Let me clarify that. There's an emphasis on what we learn in our formal structures, right? But actually the examples you cited are what we learn from our informal structures. Our communities, our families, our uncles, our parents. I learned my appreciation of art from my father. I was very patient in terms of teaching, and there wasn't an outcome and I didn't have to pass an exam, right? So that's where I learned to appreciate it. Or when you visit the Ribolla Arts route, the artists learn there because of community-based structures, not formal schooling structures. So it becomes, how do we start investing in the informal structures as well, because it's particularly neglected, and leads to the second part of it, which is our traditional knowledge, our indigenous knowledge, our cultural knowledge. The storytelling forms, the poetic forms, the music traditions that would be Ohari, Umbira, so many that we are neglecting largely, not completely, there's also movement for it. But how do we also start including these into the formal structure or ensuring investment in the informal structure?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I don't. No, but just my quick response is, and I totally understand that, and in actual fact, I normally have conversations with musicians on my show who learned informally, to play the instrument or sing or whatever. And then there are those who are studying at tertiary and universities, and they go and acquire PhDs and what have you. And the common thread in their answers is, as much as I have this degree, doctorate in music and what have you, which is in this formal, at that level, I miss who I am in what I'm learning, because it's structured, it's very Western, it's a certain kind of way, and then they have to find a way of now using that information in trying to now create using. And you cannot, as a musician, say I'm doing South African music if you don't know anything about being South African, about who you are culturally and what the values are, what the customs are, and what the drum represents in the story, how to chant or sing, or if you've got no history in being a South African, what story are you going to tell me? Except what you learned, at school by somebody else who was really sharing their culture in as well, So just getting pouring into that, I think Sipho HotStix must start, these community workshops and things. I'm joking.
No, it's serious. We should do that.
But it's those who know, they must just share.
I think from a schooling perspective, we have to be less driven by assessment, right? So things can only change if the top changes, because everything is driven by what the top is expecting all the way through. So if your universities are intent on having these end of matric examinations, and nobody's questioning that and asking about, children. It's funny, I'm privileged enough to be able to work with students in musical theatre. I don't have a test at the end of that. I've never seen students work as hard to be able to produce a piece of art, right, as that. I don't think they work that hard in science or maths. Okay, what is it about children that we need to accept that children want to learn, and they are best placed to learn when it's in informal learning, because they don't have the stress of having to achieve what the teacher wants them to achieve, or those end of year results that the universities are going to expect in order for them to get into those courses. So it takes a national discussion over where are our children in terms of anxiety and mental health. What are we actually doing to our children? What are we gaining from the education system? But you have to be able to have, I keep going back, sorry, the ministers are going to hate me, I'm probably going to get locked up. But you have to go back to the people that are running those kind of, the people that have the power, right? I've often questioned assessments and what subjects children are taking and how many subjects they have to take for matric. I mean, we're one of the only countries in the world that have to do 7 subjects. Why are you putting that pressure on children, right? Take away the pressure, make it more informal, and you'll find that the kids will still be able to learn. And unfortunately, parents are driven by that, right? So it's the pressure that comes from parents on their children to when's the next test? When am I going to see? So we're in a pressurized situation, and a situation that is really unhealthy for our children. And that's what I agree with what you're saying over there, is when you see them going into art and music, you see that anxiety come right down. But we got to learn from that, and we got to be able to reach the power makers to be able to say, can we not at least have an Indaba to question these things? We're not saying just change it, but can we at least open a forum to see whether what we have is actually working? And until we do that, it's not going to change.
So if anybody's watching right now or listening, perhaps this is your call to action. If you have access to ministers, that's the conversation we need to be having.
But I also think our biggest problem is we've given too much power for that determination. We have allowed politicians to be the people that make or break us in terms of the power that you speak about power, but where does their power lie? Yeah. How do we then judge, use them as a barometer of the power that we have as being able to influence society? We've given too much power to them to say, well, if they don't give us the money, then a festival or a show cannot, because it's always about the material. Their role is more material rather than really, appreciation of what the arts are all about.
Absolutely.
And perhaps until such time that we decide that we're taking that power, we bring it to ourselves, then I think things may be different. Hugh Masekela always said, politicians are scared of the power of the arts.
Of course.
Because they understand exactly what the arts can do. And you can actually ensure that their positions are minimized because of the power that you have as the arts. And I've always maintained that actually Brahu is right. Because if we, for instance, I'll give you an example of Mandela was in prison for so many years, and politicians have been there all over the world and talking and so on. But it was until those concerts, the musicians got together and suddenly young people who didn't even know who Mandela was suddenly said, oh, they suddenly knew who Nelson Mandela was. And once those young people started, making those demands. I've been in many of these activities. I mean, I went to a concert in Cape Town, for instance. There was a group of Afrikaner musicians, many of them. It used to be called Full Vryheid. These were young Afrikaner kids who suddenly felt apartheid was not about us. It was about our parents. And they went on to say, not in our name. And they were able, one of the kids actually was Pete Coroner's son, who was singing and said, no, it can no longer happen in our name. And this is the power of the arts. Once those young people were able to influence their parents in how they thought and how they advanced change, things became different, trust me.
Maybe that's why then, Joseph, we're having problems with getting sponsorship from corporates, because corporates are scared that if we put money into these people, they might start singing about how we are not doing right.
Yeah.
Because the arts are not, you can't predict what story they're going to tell.
Exactly.
Because they are always a reflection of what's happening in society.
I just came now from the Festival for Excellence in Dramatic Arts for students. Every single production I saw was a production of young people protesting something.
Yeah.
So when they are given that opportunity, you will see how they feel. And you're absolutely right. They will protest what is taking place. And maybe you're saying people are scared of that.
We have an audience member that's protesting with a mic. Who wants to ask a question? So let's hand it over to Tim.
Yeah. So at first, I think we should just give them another round of applause. They're doing so.
Thank you.
So I'm Timothy Maurice, I'm author, researcher, and a partner here at Podcast Party, and I want to put the idea of competition on the table. And I heard your point, Joseph, about unhealthy competition, but I want to talk about healthy competition in the context of the arts. Some of the greatest artistic pieces we have in the world were commissioned in competition. Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo were commissioned to compete against each other to show dominance in their cultures. And out of that competition was produced the Sistine Chapel and the Mona Lisa. And to commission them, you had to have extraordinary confidence to be able to put them on the front line and say, I believe you will demonstrate our cultural dominance. So how do we, in healthy competition, not unhealthy, show the extraordinary power that South African artists have?
Who's going to take this one?
Don't put them on Spotify.
I'm not sure if I'm able to answer that one. I've never been in a space where I have there's competition in what I do. There's more interaction rather than really competing against colleagues. I think in my view and in my personal experiences, as musicians, obviously, there's what you call jam sessions. You know, with those jam sessions, you learn from each other rather than competing against each other. And in that process, you advance each other, right? And you don't reach a point where someone is going to say, so-and-so sounded better than, you know. It was a collective sound that we all bring to the fore. And we all sound great because we've learned from each other, not competed against each other. Even though it may have sounded competitive, but in the process of us playing, you know, he's probably running certain things, you play, running certain things, and we're learning from each other. There is nothing that says it's competitive. So I'm not sure if that gives an answer in terms of the South African.
I mean, I think there is definitely a thinking, and there is a way of thinking, and a very, and I'm really not knocking the whole kind of capitalist notion of healthy competition, but I think where the world is heading is into a space, into a much more collaborative space. Absolutely. A space where we understand that in order to get the best out of what we're going to do, we have to have boardrooms, and we have to have artistic spaces, and we have to have a South African, we have to have a government where we have different people who come from different thought patterns, who have different lived experiences coming together, because that's when we can create the strongest brand. Yep. We have to be able to do that. And as long as we keep, even as political parties, competing, I mean, I was just listening this morning to this whole thing about the guy from the EFF who's now been kicked out of the Mkhonto Wesizwe party, and now he's going back to this. And it's like, why are you all fighting with one another?
But it's politics.
It's politics.
It's politics. I don't know if politics is an art.
But look at the whole idea of the competition of politics. Yeah. When do we get to the stage where we actually say, can we come together as parties? Because if we could do that and collaborate, each one of those political parties has something to give. Has something to add to making South Africa a better place.
So I think the GNU could be that collaborative thing that we've been waiting for, possibly. Don't quote me on that. But from my perspective, from a media space, so I've been in this game for 11 years, reporting on the good news, and there are other publications who have either popped up or who are trying to focus on good news, and I applaud them. There is no competition. Why? Because the more good news that is out there, the better for South Africa. So the collaboration is a strong point. I'm going to take 3 more questions, just in the essence of time.
Can I just also add before the next question, in terms of just democracy and jazz, that jazz is democracy at play, because how a jazz band creates music. You got different musicians, they all come with their different talent, their different ideas and creativity. You may have the main guy, but the main guy doesn't play alone. He plays with these other musicians, and they create this song or this music. And then while they're playing, he lets each and every one of them have a solo where they improvise. And then the others are listening and they're thinking, I'm going to come in there just after that. And then the main guy comes back and wraps it all up at the end. Everyone is happy. Everyone got to express themselves. Everyone got to create, and their piece of their world is in that song.
I want to listen to some jazz now.
There you go.
All right, three more questions. Just at we've got a microphone here, and then we'll pass the mic back to you, sir.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lee Dupree. So mine is a comment more than a question. I agree with the allegory of music and how it impacts life, by the way. And something I had a realization about a while ago is that, you know, some people think jazz is right and that's the best kind of music, and other people think classical music or orchestral music is right. They're very different types of music. One is very structured, the other is very unstructured, but they're both right. And if more people could just realize that about life, we would get so much further together. But what I really wanted to speak about is, I had a realization last week that I don't trust people who can't cook, who can't sing, or who can't play any instrument. Any one of them.
Can we pick one of those? Do you have to tick the box on all three, or just one?
Anyone. You must be able to do any one of those.
Okay.
Right. And I'll explain to you why. I realize that people who can't cook, or who can't sing, or who can't play any instrument, none of the above, don't have an appreciation for what it takes to mix art and science together to be able to get an outcome from something, right? Cooking is a bit of art and science put together. Being able to play an instrument, I can play a couple of instruments myself. I've sang in different choirs and bands, etc. So what that's done for me is also shown me how, and I'm so glad Joseph and his amazing technicality Dreamcoat brought this up. But where people do not have the ability in leadership to be able to see a problem coming before the KPIs tell you the problem is coming, it's because they probably don't have that background understanding of music. Because you can tell when something is not harmonious in music long before your KPI reports tell you there's a problem.
Absolutely.
So I've had this realization that anybody else I recruit into my business in future
a good point to have.
Yes.
Good point to
must
have.
be able to do one of the above, preferably all.
All.
Okay.
And I think it cements what you have all said tonight, that creativity is important when it comes to everything in the world. Our next question, please. Who's got the mic?
Hi, my name's Laurie. I am a primary school drama teacher, amongst other things. I just wanted to firstly say thank you to all of you. Even this podcast party is a work of art, and I have to say that I really have felt touched and moved by what you've said this evening, which is exactly what you're saying the arts does. My question is for Mr. Gerassi. I wanted to find out, can you tell us a bit more about the Redhill Arts Festival that's coming up? And as I said, I'm a drama teacher of primary school children. Perhaps you could tell me and any other teachers listening what you have on offer and why we should bring our students to your arts festival.
Laurie's a former student of mine.
That's why she called you Mr. Gerassi.
That's why she called me Mr. Gerassi. You can't get out of that. I remember Laurie's mom dragging me off to go and see her dance when she was about 4 to tell me this was going to be the new star in my school. And it just so happened that she was. She played the lead in all of my productions, and she now is a well-known actress herself. So thank you for that question. Redfest is ready to bring the arts to the Johannesburg community. It's the largest arts festival in Johannesburg, and it brings together musicians, it brings together artists, it brings together actors and directors. There are over 20 productions, professional productions that are staged on our campus. We have the likes of Matthew Mole and so many other, Mzansi Youth Choir, all performing right through that weekend. The Friday is a day of arts education just for students from all over the country, and the Monday, being Youth Day, is for student works to be produced. Over the weekend it's professional works, and if you've got the time over the youth weekend at Redhill School, we just celebrate the arts. There are about 5,000 to 7,000 people that will flock the campus, good food, artisanal markets. It's just getting out and being part of the Johannesburg arts community.
Tickets available from where?
If you get onto our website, www.redfest.co.za, you'll be able to get your tickets straight there. The full program, the full lineup is all on that website.
Support the arts, and that's how we do it. We've got one more question, and it's a gentleman with the mic there. But I'm not stopping the questions for the evening. We're still going to be here. So when we're done shooting the podcast, we're still going to hang around. So if there's any other questions, conversations, if you want to network, we are here. And if you're missing this because you're watching it on a podcast, I'm so sorry. Last question, please, sir.
Hi, everyone. My name is Singeta Chauke. So I have one quick question to Mr. Legendary HotStix Mabuse. So we see a lot of artists, from actors and musicians, asking for donations every day, going broke every day. So as a parent, you wouldn't want that for your kid. So one question, what can the kids now do different to avoid all of that?
I think, as I was talking, I did indicate that if I had it, and probably wrongfully, because of how society view the arts and so on, it made it a bit difficult for us to accept that, our children can be artists. Unfortunately, because of the kind of support, the limited support or no support at all, it makes it very difficult for the arts to thrive and to make it a livelihood for the artists. And this is where the biggest challenge is, because artists, unfortunately, do not necessarily or always make money from what they do. So this is why you'd find many parents who probably discourage their children from. I'm just as guilty. I did indicate that every time I hear all my children say, I'm going to sing. And I say, when are you going to get a job? And this is what my parents used to ask me. My mother would say, as I earlier on said, I was at high school, and I left school before I could even complete my matric. My parents were so angry at me. You see, you left school and you're becoming a singer. You're becoming this musician. But of course, things changed when I bought a home for them. The relationship was different now, and they were proudly saying, "Oh, our son and so on." But it's a dichotomy of becoming an artist, because not all of us will make success of everything. However much we love to be in this, it's even worse now. It's even worse now because with all the social media, the streaming, artists musicians in particular, do not make as much money as, perhaps some of us would have made. I was privileged. I was very lucky that I wrote one of the songs that even still today, I still get royalties, and she always plays the music. Thank you. It is a very difficult space to navigate. And if I could, I would always say, we always say, get education first so that you have something to lean on. But is it what our children want to do?
Let's hope that the education they get is that of Joseph's, so they get both at the same time.
And then they can employ it
they got it all.
Yeah.
I want to, if I could ask, just to give our panelists such a big round of applause for such an insightful conversation this evening. I've taken away so much, I'm sure, as the audience have. But to sum it up, the culture, the arts, creativity, it connects us, it gives us empathy, it brings us joy, it gives us problem-solving skills, and it has the ability to plant seeds of change that could change the world, and often, very often, they do. I want to thank everybody for coming this evening. Podcast party, thank you for tuning in. Yeah? The podcast is officially ending now, so that's over for you guys watching and listening.